Hey guys, tonight we transport you to a smoky 16th century Ottoman coffee house, where the air hums with clinking cups and whispered plots. Picture yourself weaving through a maze of low wooden tables, the scent of roasted beans curling into your nostrils, while bearded men in turbans glare at you, expecting perfection. One wrong move, say, spilling a drop of coffee on their precious rug, and you're toast. Honestly, you probably won't survive your first shift. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push through the heavy curtain at the coffee house door, and chaos swallows you whole. The room buzzes like a beehive on a sugar high. Men lounge on cushions, their voices a low rumble of laughter, arguments, and poetry recitations, all underscored by the rhythmic clink of tiny porcelain cups. Your job: serve coffee so flawless it could broker peace treaties. Spill a drop on the rug, hanged. Brew it with too much sugar, exile to some dusty outpost. Okay, maybe not literally, but the glares from these patrons feel like a death sentence. You're not just a server, you're a tightrope walker in a den of caffeine-addicted lions. The coffee house, or kahvehane, is the heart of Ottoman social life. Historians note that by the mid-1500s, these venues sprang up across Istanbul, from the Grand Bazaar's edges to the Bosphorus waterfront. They weren't just places to sip a drink, they were cultural hubs where men, sorry, ladies, you're not invited yet, debated politics, shared gossip, and occasionally plotted rebellions. One quirky tidbit: some coffee houses hired professional storytellers who'd spin tales of heroic sultans while you scurried to refill cups. Imagine dodging a poet's flailing arms mid-epic while balancing a tray. Good luck. Your first task is surviving the sensory overload. The air is thick with charcoal smoke from the brazier where beans roast, stinging your eyes like a bad TikTok filter. The floor creaks under your sandals, and every step risks tripping over a sprawled-out patron's hookah pipe. You spot a grizzled regular, his mustache drooping like a tired walrus, beckoning you with a finger. "Faster, boy," he growls, and you realize speed is your only armor. Joke number one: if you thought your barista gig at Starbucks was rough, try serving coffee where the tip is not getting banished. You clutch your tray, a wobbly thing that feels like it's plotting against you. The coffee pots, or sezvi, are copper and scalding hot, their long handles your only defense against burns. You pour a cup, aiming for that perfect frothy layer Ottoman coffee is famous for. Too thin, and the customer might chuck it at you. Too thick, and you're accused of skimping on the grounds. Historians still argue whether coffee houses were truly egalitarian or just glorified boys' clubs for the elite. Either way, you're at the bottom of the pecking order, dodging insults like a verbal fencing match. The noise doesn't help. A lute player in the corner strums a melody that's half genius, half headache. Two merchants haggle over silk prices, their shouts drowning out a scholar reciting Rumi. You weave through, tray aloft, praying you don't trip over a stray cushion. Here's a fringe fact: some Ottoman coffee houses had secret compartments in the walls for hiding banned books or seditious pamphlets. You glance at a shadowy corner, wondering if that guy sipping his coffee is a poet or a spy. Probably both. Your first customer, Mr. Mustache, snaps his fingers. You hustle over, pouring with the precision of a heart surgeon. The coffee steams, its aroma a mix of earth and spice, but his scowl says you're already failing. Too slow, he mutters, and you bite back a retort. Joke 2. You're starting to think the coffee's bitterness comes from the customers, not the beans. You move on, learning fast that every patron has a quirk. One wants his cup warmed. Another demands you stir counterclockwise. Who knew coffee could be this high maintenance? The mainstream fact hits you as you work. Coffee houses were so central to Ottoman life that Sultan Murad IV tried to ban them in the 1630s, fearing they fueled dissent. Spoiler, he failed. People loved their coffee too much. You're not surprised, given how these guys clutch their cups like life rafts. As you dodge another hookah pipe, you realize survival here means mastering the chaos. Every clink, shout, and scalding pot is a test. Joke 3. If you make it through the day, you deserve a medal or at least a nap. You're not sure you'll last the hour, let alone the day. The coffee house is a beast, and you're just a speck in its whirlwind. But you grip your tray tighter, take a shaky breath, and plunge back into the fray. The beans are roasting, the patrons are waiting, and your fate hangs on every pour. You've issued the continue command, so I'll proceed with section 2 of the boring history for sleep, why you wouldn't last a day as an Ottoman coffee server script, expanding the second bullet from the 18-bullet outline. Bean origins. You learn the sacred origins of coffee, guarded by imperial secrets. I'll deliver a 1,000 to 1,100 word narrative in second-person present, maintaining the relaxed YouTube host voice with gentle sarcasm and ASMR cadence. This section will include 3 light jokes, 1 mainstream historical fact, 1 quirky tidbit, 1 scholarly debate phrase, and seamless continuity from section 1 without reintroducing the topic. I'll also weave in sensory details, modern asides, and callbacks like the chaos of the coffee house, while keeping it PG-13 and true to the bullet's focus on coffee's origins and their guarded nature. Here we go. You're still reeling from the coffee house chaos, your tray wobbling like it's got a personal vendetta, when the head server, a wiry man with eyes like a hawk, grabs your arm. Boy, he hisses, you don't just serve coffee, you honor its story. You're hustled to a dim back room, the air heavy with the scent of burlap sacks stuffed with coffee beans. The noise of the kahvehane, that buzzing hive of shouts and loots from, 10 minutes ago, fades to a muffled hum. Here, surrounded by flickering oil lamps, you're about to learn why these beans are treated like state secrets. Spoiler, messing this up might land you in hotter water than that scalding sesvi you nearly dropped. The head server, let's call him Hawkeyes, points to the sacks. These, he says, are sacred. You stifle a yawn. Sacred beans, really. But his glare shuts you up. He launches into a tale, his voice low and rhythmic, like he's channeling a bedtime story for grumpy sultans. Coffee, he says, didn't start here in Istanbul. It came from Ethiopia centuries ago, where a goat herd named Kaldi noticed his flock dancing after nibbling red coffee cherries. You picture goats doing a caffeine-fueled jig and bite back a grin. Joke 1, if goats can handle coffee better than you, you're in serious trouble. This origin story is no myth, though. Mainstream history backs it. Coffee likely spread from Ethiopia to Yemen by the 15th century, then exploded across the Ottoman Empire after merchants brought it to Constantinople. By the 1550s, coffee houses like the one you're slaving in were everywhere, fueling everything from poetry slams to shady deals. Hawkeyes leans closer, his breath smelling faintly of cardamom. The bean's journey, he whispers, is guarded by the Sultan's men. You realize coffee isn't just a drink, it's a power play, controlled like gold or silk. You're handed a single bean, dark and glossy, like a tiny obsidian pebble. It's heavier than it looks, or maybe that's just your nerves. You roll it between your fingers, catching a whiff of earth and smoke. The Ottomans, Hawkeyes explains, don't just import beans, they regulate them. Only trusted traders, sworn to secrecy, handle the supply from Mocha's ports in Yemen. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some rumors claim the Sultan's agents laced bad batches with mild poison to punish disloyal merchants. You glance at the bean, half expecting it to hiss. Poison in your coffee? You'd rather face Mr. Mustache's scowl from the front room. The back room feels like a shrine. Sacks are stacked like offerings, each stamped with a merchant's seal. You trace one, its wax cracked like an old man's smile. Hawkeyes drones on about the bean's sacredness, but your mind wanders to the coffeehouse's chaos. Remember that lute player who nearly tripped you. You're starting to think the real sacred thing here is your ability to stay upright. Joke 2. Maybe the beans are holy, but your tray handling skills are downright sinful. Hawkeyes snaps his fingers, pulling you back. He's explaining how coffee's spread was no accident. The Ottoman court, he says, saw its potential early, not just as a drink, but as a tool. Coffee kept scholars awake, soldiers alert, and gossip flowing. But it also sparked trouble. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans embraced coffee to control social spaces or if it slipped through their fingers, fueling rebellion in those smoky Kavhanes. You're not sure, but the way Hawkeyes grips his knife while talking about loyalty makes you think control is the goal. Your job, he says, starts with respecting the bean. You're shown how to sort them, picking out duds that could ruin a brew. A bad bean, he warns, is a betrayal. You fumble one, and it rolls under a sack. Hawkeyes doesn't notice, but your stomach twists. The air's getting stuffy, the lamps flickering like they're judging you. You're starting to feel the weight of this sacred business. Every bean is a link in a chain. Ethiopia, Yemen, Mocha, Istanbul, and you're the weakest one. He moves to the roasting setup, a small brazier glowing like a dragon's eye. You're told to watch the beans turn from green to brown, but not black. Burn them and you're done. You crouch, sweat beading on your neck, as the beans pop like tiny firecrackers. The smell is intoxicating, like earth waking up, but one wrong move and you'll have a pile of charcoal. Joke 3. You're no barista. You're a bean babysitter, and these kids are fussy. Hawkeyes hands you a sack to haul to the front. It's heavier than your ego after acing a history quiz, and you stagger under it. The coffeehouse noise creeps back, clinking cups, that lute still plucking away. You're not just carrying beans, you're carrying a legacy, one that's been smuggled, traded, and maybe poisoned. You glance at Hawkeyes, his eyes glinting with something like pride or suspicion. You're not sure you're cut out for this sacred stuff, but the beans are in your hands, and the coffeehouse waits. You stumble out of the back room, the weight of that sacred bean sack still bruising your shoulder, and the coffeehouse's chaos hits you like a runaway cart. The lute's still strumming, patrons are shouting over each other, and the air's thick with charcoal smoke and impatience. Hawkeyes, your drill sergeant of a boss, shoves you toward a corner where a stone mortar and pestle sit like a medieval torture device. Grind, he barks, pointing at a pile of roasted beans. You're about to learn that grinding coffee in an Ottoman kahvehane isn't just a task, it's a performance, and the audience is a pack of caffeine-crazed wolves with zero chill. Spill a drop from that tray you're barely managing, hanged. Grind too coarse, exiled. Okay, maybe not exiled, But the way these patrons are staring, you're not ruling it out. You set the sack down, your arms screaming for mercy, and scoop a handful of those glossy beans you were just worshipping in the back room. The mortar's heavy, its surface worn smooth by years of use, and the pestle feels like it's judging your grip. You start grinding, the beans crunching like gravel underfoot, but every eye in the room seems locked on you. There's Mr. Mustache from your first pour, his walrus-like scowl, now upgraded to a full-on death glare. A scholar in a corner pauses mid-lecture to squint at you, and even the lute player misses a note, as if your grinding's off-key. Joke 1. You're not grinding coffee, you're auditioning for the world's pickiest talent show. The mainstream fact here is that Ottoman coffee preparation was an art form. By the 16th century, the empire had perfected a method of grinding beans into an ultra-fine powder, finer than anything you'd find in a modern espresso machine. This powder was key to the thick, frothy texture of Turkish coffee. Served unfiltered in those tiny cups you're dodging hookah pipes to deliver. You push the pestle harder, sweat beading on your forehead as the beans turn to dust. Too coarse and the coffee won't froth. Too fine and it's sludge. You're aiming for perfection, but perfection feels like trying to thread a needle during an earthquake. The patrons don't make it easier. A merchant in a silk robe leans over, sniffing the air like he's a bloodhound. "Not fine enough," he mutters, and you resist the urge to dump the mortar on his head. Another guy, puffing on a hookah, shouts, "Hurry up, boy." You're starting to think the sacred beans Hawkeye's rambled about aren't worth this. The grinding's rhythmic. Crunch, scrape, crunch. But every sound draws more stares. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman coffee houses had grind masters, servers who'd turn the mortar into a show, spinning it like a DJ to impress patrons. You try a little flair, twirling the pestle, but it slips, scattering beans. The merchant gasps like you just insulted his mother. You scoop the strays, praying Hawkeye's didn't see. The coffee house hums around you, a mix of clinking cups and heated debates, but your world is this mortar. The bean's aroma is sharp now, like burnt toast with a hint of spice, and it's almost calming, until Mr. Mustache snaps his fingers. You grind faster, your arms burning, and wonder how you went from sorting beans to performing for Istanbul's grumpiest critics. Joke 2. If these guys were on Yelp, they'd give you 1 star for insufficient wrist strength. Historians still argue whether the coffee house's obsession with grind precision was about taste or status. Was the ultra-fine powder a culinary choice, or a way for elites to flex their wealth by demanding labor-intensive brews? You don't care. You just want to survive the next 5 minutes. The pestle's getting heavier, your hands cramping, but the powder's starting to look right, like dark, silty sand. You glance at Hawkeye's, who's hovering nearby, his hawk-like stare boring into you. 1 nod from him, and you might live to pour another cup. A new patron, a poet with a beard like a bird's nest, waves you over mid-grind. "Make it quick," he says, "or my muse will flee." You want to tell him his muse is probably hiding from his poetry, but you bite your tongue. The grinding's relentless, and the mortar's edge is now dusted with coffee so fine it's practically floating. You're starting to get it. Every crunch is a step toward that perfect brew, the kind that keeps this coffee house alive. But the scrutiny, it's suffocating. Even the walls, carved with swirling arabesques, seem to lean in, judging. You finish a batch, the powder smooth as talc, and Hawkeye's grunts in approval. You're not sure if that's praise or just him clearing his throat, but you'll take it. You scoop the grounds into a cloth, ready for brewing, and wipe your brow. The coffee house hasn't slowed, lutes, hookahs, and all. Joke 3. You're one good grind away from a promotion, or at least not getting fired before lunch. But as you hand the grounds off, you catch Mr. Mustache's eye. He's still watching, waiting for you to screw up. You grip the mortar tighter, ready for the next batch, and plunge back into the grind. You're still shaking off the grind's arm-numbing grind, the fine coffee dust clinging to your fingers like a second skin, when Hawkeyes nudges you toward the brazier. The coffee house's chaos, lutes twanging, patrons bickering, swirls around you. But now it's time to brew. The air's thick with charcoal smoke, and the copper sesvi gleams under flickering lamplight, daring you to get this right. Brewing Ottoman coffee isn't just tossing grounds in hot water, it's a ritual, a dance of heat and timing that could make or break your day. Spill a drop on the rug, hanged. Brew too bitter, exiled to a life of scrubbing pots. The patrons, like that walrus-mustached grump from your first pour, are watching, their eyes sharper than the dagger at Hawkeye's belt. You grab the sesvi, its handle warm from the brazier's glow, and scoop in the powdery grounds you slaved over. The mortar's still sitting there, a silent witness to your earlier struggles, and you're already missing its simplicity. Water goes in next, cold and clear, followed by a pinch of sugar for the sweet-toothed poet in the corner. You stir, the grounds swirling like a tiny storm, and set the pot over the coals. The brazier hisses, spitting sparks, and you flinch. Joke 1. If you burn the coffee, you'll be the one roasting next. Mainstream history tells us Ottoman coffee brewing was a cultural cornerstone. By the 1600s, the method, grounds boiled in a sesvi to create a thick, frothy brew, was so iconic it spread to Europe, shaping modern Turkish coffee. You're aiming for that froth, a creamy layer that sits like a crown on the cup. Too little, and the poet will write a scathing verse about you. Too much, and Mr. Mustache will accuse you of witchcraft. You watch the sesvi, the surface bubbling softly, and pray you've nailed the ratio. The smell's intoxicating, deep, earthy, with a hint of caramel. But one wrong move and it's bitter sludge. A merchant in a velvet cap leans over, his hookah pipe dangling dangerously close to your elbow. Don't let it boil over, he warns, as if you needed the pressure. You nod, sweat trickling down your neck, and adjust the sesvi slightly off the coals. The ritual's precise. Heat until the froth rises. Pull back, heat again, repeat. It's like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. You're starting to think those sacred beans Hawkeyes preached about aren't worth the hassle. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman brewers added a drop of rosewater to the sesvi for fancy clients, claiming it elevated the soul. You glance at the poet, wondering if he's the rosewater type. Probably. The froth rises, a beige foam creeping up the sesvi's rim, and you yank it off the heat just in time. The merchant grunts, mildly impressed, but you're not out of the woods. You pour a test cup, the coffee thick as molasses, and check the froth. It's decent, but the poet's already waving you over, his beard quivering with impatience. My muse waits for no man, he declares. Joke 2. You're pretty sure his muse is just caffeine withdrawal in a fancy hat. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman coffee ritual was about flavor or control. Did the meticulous brewing process ensure quality, or was it a way to keep servers like you in line, too busy to join the coffee house's rebellious whispers? You don't have time to ponder. You're already reheating the sesvi for the second boil. The coals glow like angry eyes, and the coffee house's noise presses in. A scholar's rant, a lute's off-key twang, Mr. Mustache's cough. You're a speck in this storm, your world narrowed to this pot and its frothy fate. You pour again. This time for the poet, aiming for his tiny cup without spilling. The coffee's surface shimmers, the froth holding strong, and he nods barely. You're not sure if that's approval or just his beard settling. The sesvi's still hot, burning your fingers through the cloth you're using as a grip, but you can't stop. Another patron, a soldier with a scar across his cheek, beckons. You start the ritual again. Grounds, water, sugar, heat. The brazier's smoke stings your eyes, and you blink back tears. You're starting to understand why Hawkeye's is so grumpy. This job's a marathon with no finish line. The soldier's cup is next, and you pour with shaky hands. The froth is thinner this time, and he scowls. Amateur, he mutters, and you bite back a retort. Joke 3. If brewing coffee were an Olympic sport, you'd be disqualified for shaky wrists. You glance at Hawkeye's, who's lurking near the hookah racks, his stare a mix of pity and warning. You're learning fast that brewing's not just skill, it's survival. Every bubble, every wisp of steam is a test, and the coffee house's unforgiving eyes are always on you. You wipe the sesvi clean, its copper gleaming like it's mocking your fumbles, and prep for the next round. The coffee house hums on, a beast that never sleeps. You're exhausted, but the brazier's glow and the patron's demands keep you moving. The ritual's got you in its grip, and there's no escape, not yet. You're still clutching the sesvi, its copper sides now a familiar burn against your palm, as the coffee houses clamor, lutes, hookahs and all, pulses around you. The poet's barely there nod from your last pour lingers like a grudging lifeline, but there's no time to bask. Hawkeye's is already glaring, pointing you toward a low table where a trio of patrons waits, their eyes tracking your every move. Serving coffee in an Ottoman kavehane isn't just handing over a cup, it's a high-stakes ritual of etiquette where one slip could tank your day. Spill a drop on their precious rug, hanged. Serve it too cold, exile to a lifetime of cleaning braziers. The rules are unspoken but ironclad, and you're about to learn them the hard way. You approach the table, tray wobbling like it's got a personal grudge from your grinding days. The patrons, a merchant with a gold-trimmed turban, a scholar scribbling on parchment, and Mr. Mustache, because of course he's here, watch you like hawks. You set the tray down, the tiny porcelain cups clinking softly, and take a breath. The coffee's froth is perfect thanks to your brazier acrobatics, but serving is a whole new beast. You've got to pour with grace, bow just right, and oh yeah, not offend anyone's ego. Joke 1. You're less a server and more a caffeinated tightrope walker. Mainstream history confirms that Ottoman coffee house etiquette was a cultural hallmark. By the late 16th century, serving coffee was a formalized act, especially in elite settings, with strict protocols dictating posture, timing, and even the angle of the pour. You start with the merchant, the apparent big shot, because serving out of order is a rookie move. You tilt the sesvi, letting the coffee flow smoothly, its aroma curling up like a smoky genie. The froth holds, and you place the cup before him with a slight bow. Too deep, and you look desperate. Too shallow, and you're rude. He nods, but his eyes say, "I'm still judging you." Next is the scholar, his fingers stained with ink. You pour again, slower this time, because Hawkeye's hissed something about respecting the learned. The scholar barely looks up, muttering about Sufi poetry, but you catch his quick glance at the cup. The froth better be flawless, or you'll be the subject of his next rant. Mr. Mustache is last, and you're tempted to accidentally splash his robe, but you resist. You pour, your hands steadier now, and set the cup down. He grunts, which you're taking as a win. Joke 2. If grunts were currency, you'd be rich by now. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman servers were trained to read coffee grounds left in cups, offering fortunes to charm patrons. You glance at the merchant's cup, wondering if you could fake a prophecy to win him over. Great wealth awaits, you imagine saying. But knowing your luck, he'd demand a refund when it didn't pan out. You're not ready for that hustle yet. The table's tense, each man sipping in silence, and you realize etiquette isn't just about the pour. It's about reading the room. The merchant's posture screams power, the scholar's distracted, and Mr. Mustache, well, he's just Mr. Mustache. Historians still argue whether coffeehouse etiquette reinforced social hierarchies or subtly undermined them. Did these rituals keep servers like you in check, or did they give you power to charm and manipulate? You're too busy dodging glares to care. You step back, tray in hand, but the merchant snaps his fingers. Another, he says, and you stifle a groan. You hustle to the brazier, reheat the sesvi, and repeat the ritual. Grounds, water, froth, pour. The coffeehouse's noise presses in. A lute's twang, a hookah's gurgle, a poet's dramatic cough. You're a cog in this caffeinated machine, and etiquette is your leash. The scholar finally looks up, his eyes narrowing. Too sweet, he mutters, and your heart sinks. You followed Hawkeye's sugar rule, but apparently this guy's a no-sugar purist. You mumble an apology, bowing just enough to seem sincere, and retreat. Mr. Mustache smirks, like he's enjoying your flop. You're starting to think the sacred beans, the grind, the brew, all that fuss, was just prep for this moment where one wrong bow could spark a feud. Joke 3. You're one bad pour away from starring in an Ottoman Yelp roast. You glance at Hawkeye's, who's polishing a sesvi, but definitely watching. His nod is so subtle it might be a trick of the lamplight, but you'll take it. You're learning the dance. Pour, bow, dodge insults, repeat. The tray's lighter now, but your shoulders ache, and the coffee house's heat is a blanket you can't shake. Another table beckons, more cups to fill, more egos to stroke. You grip the sesvi, its warmth a small comfort, and plunge back into the ritual, hoping your etiquette holds up. You're still catching your breath from the etiquette gauntlet, the sesvi's warmth lingering in your hand like a clingy friend, when Hawkeye's grabs your sleeve. The coffee house's usual chaos, lutes strumming, hookahs bubbling, Mr. Mustache's eternal scowl, fades as he pulls you toward a side door. The Sultan's court, he whispers, his voice sharp as a blade. You're not serving the regular crowd anymore. You're stepping into the big leagues, where coffee is less a drink and more a test of loyalty and survival. One wrong move, spill a drop on the Sultan's silk rug, hanged. Serve it lukewarm, exiled to a desert outpost. The stakes are sky high, and your tray's already trembling. You step through the door into a courtyard, the air cooler but heavy with jasmine and tension. The Sultan's palace looms ahead, its marble arches gleaming under torchlight. You're led to a chamber where viziers and guards in gold-trimmed robes lounge on cushions, their eyes slicing through you. The Sultan himself isn't here, thank your lucky stars, but his court is picky enough. You clutch your tray, the same wobbly one from the Cave Hane, now loaded with ornate silver cups. Joke 1. If you thought Mr. Mustache was tough, these guys make him look like a teddy bear. Mainstream history notes that coffee was a status symbol in the Ottoman court by the 16th century. Sultans like Suleiman the Magnificent used it to impress guests, with servers trained to perform flawless pours as a show of imperial precision. You're no trained performer, though. You approach a vizier, his beard braided with gold thread, and pour from the sesvi. The coffee's froth is solid. Thank you, brazier skills. But you're sweating buckets. The pour must be slow, the cup presented with a bow, and, Oh yeah, no eye contact. You manage it, barely, and he sips without a word. Silence is your only reward. The chamber's opulent, with silk tapestries and a fountain gurgling in the corner, but it's a pressure cooker. A guard with a scimitar at his hip watches you like you're a potential assassin. You move to the next vizier, this one fingering a string of amber beads. You pour, bow, and pray your tray doesn't betray you. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some court servers slipped secret messages into coffee cups, using grounds arranged in patterns to signal allies. You glance at your pour, wondering if you could pull that off. Probably not. Your hands are shaking too much. The vizier with the beads mutters something about the coffee being adequate, and you nearly drop the sesvi. Adequate, you slaved over those grounds, that froth. You bite your tongue and move on, remembering Hawkeye's warning. One complaint and you're out. The court's rules make the coffee house's etiquette look like a picnic. You're dodging invisible tripwires. Pour too fast, and you're sloppy too slow, and you're disrespectful. Joke 2. You're starting to think the Sultan's rug is more sacred than those beans Hawkeye's rambled about. Historians still argue whether coffee in the Ottoman court was a diplomatic tool or a loyalty test. Did sultans use it to charm foreign ambassadors or to keep servers and courtiers on edge, proving their devotion? You're leaning toward the latter as you pour for a third vizier, this one with a stare that could curdle milk. His cup's heavier, silver etched with vines, and you nearly tip it. He sips, then waves you off like you're a fly. You retreat, tray rattling, and catch a guard's smirk. You're a speck in this gilded cage, and they know it. You circle back to the first vizier, who's now chatting with a scribe. He snaps his fingers for a refill, and you hustle over, sesvi steaming. The froth holds, but your bow's a bit shaky, and he raises an eyebrow. You're starting to miss the coffee house's chaos, lutes and all, because at least there a grunt was a compliment. Here every gesture's a judgment. You pour again. The coffee's aroma rich but no comfort now. The chamber's fountain gurgles, mocking your nerves, and you wonder how many servers before you flubbed this and vanished. Joke 3. If you survive this shift, you're framing that sesvi as a war trophy. You glance at Hawkeye's, stationed by the door, his nod so faint it's practically a myth. You're learning the court's rhythm, pour, bow, dodge glares. But it's brutal. The vizier's robes rustle, their voices a low hum of power plays, and you're just the coffee guy, invisible until you screw up. You grip your tray, steady your hands, and move to the next cup, praying you pass this test. You're still reeling from the Sultan's court, your tray lighter but your nerves heavier, as Hawkeye's hustles you back to the Kavhain's smoky chaos. The vizier's icy stares fade, replaced by the familiar din of lutes, hookahs, and Mr. Mustache's cough. You're back on home turf, but the coffee house isn't just a place for frothy pours, it's the beating heart of Ottoman gossip, where secrets and stories swirl faster than the grounds in your sesvi. You're about to dive into this social hub, tray in hand, serving coffee while eavesdropping on the pulse of Istanbul. Spill a drop, hanged. Miss a juicy rumor, you're missing the point of this place. You weave through the crowd, the air thick with charcoal and intrigue. Low tables are packed with men, merchants, poets, even a soldier or two, huddled over cups, their voices a tangle of boasts and whispers. You pour for a table of traders, the coffee's froth holding strong, and catch snippets of their talk. Silk prices, a ship lost off Crete, someone's shady deal with a Venetian. You're not just a server, you're a fly on the wall, soaking up the city's underbelly. Joke 1. You're half barista, half spy, and terrible at both. Mainstream history confirms coffee houses were Ottoman social epicenters. By the 1600s, kavhanes were where men gathered to swap news, debate politics, and flex their wits, often under the Sultan's wary eye. You set a cup before a poet, his quill scratching furiously, and overhear him muttering about a banned pamphlet. The guy next to him, a merchant with a scar, hisses about taxes. You realize this place isn't just loud, it's alive, a web of ideas and grudges. You pour again, dodging a hookah pipe, and try to keep up. A scholar at another table waves you over, his turban slightly askew. You serve him, the sezvi's steam curling like a ghost, and catch him arguing about the Sultan's latest decree. It'll spark riots, he says, and his friend shushes him. You linger, pretending to wipe your tray, because this is gold. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some coffee houses had eavesdropping corners, spots where servers lingered to relay gossip to informants, or just to stay in the know. You're not sure if your corner's one of those, but you're definitely listening. The poet's voice rises, reciting a verse that sounds suspiciously anti-Sultan. Heads turn, and you freeze, sezvi mid-pour. The merchant with the scar shoots him a look, and you wonder if you're serving a rebel hideout. You move on, heart pounding, and pour for a soldier who's bragging about a border skirmish. His cup's chipped, but he doesn't notice, too busy exaggerating his heroics. Joke 2, if his stories were coffee, they'd be decaf, weak and pointless. Historians still argue whether coffee houses were true public forums or elite echo chambers. Did they give voice to the masses or just amplify the loudest egos? You're too busy dodging glares to care, but the chatter's electric. A trader mentions a new coffee shipment from Mocha, and you flash back to Hawkeye's sacred bean lecture. You pour for him, the froth perfect, and he tips you a nod, rare as gold. The kavhane's a stage, and every cup you serve is a ticket to the show. You circle back to the scholar, who's now debating astrology with a hookah-puffing friend. Mars is in retrograde, he insists, and you nearly snort. You serve him anyway, the coffee's aroma cutting through the hookah's sweet haze. The lute player in the corner switches to a livelier tune, and the room's energy shifts. Louder, looser. You're starting to get the rhythm. Pour, listen, dodge hookahs, repeat. But the gossip's a maze. One wrong word overheard, one rumor repeated, and you could be in trouble. Joke 3. You're collecting gossip like Pokemon cards, but none are shiny. You glance at Hawkeye's, who's polishing a tray but definitely watching. He knows the kavhane's secrets too, and his silence feels like a warning. You serve another table, this one full of poets, their voices rising in a heated rhyme battle. The coffee house hums, a beast of sound and smoke, and you're caught in its web. Every pour, every snippet of gossip, pulls you deeper into Istanbul's pulse. You grip your sezvi, steady your tray, and keep moving, ears open, hoping you don't hear something you'll regret. You're still buzzing from the coffee house's gossip, the trader's whispers and poets' sly verses ringing in your ears, as you weave through the smoky kavehane. The lute's twang and hookah gurgles keep the chaos alive, but now you're serving a table of poets, their quills flying and voices sharp with defiance. This isn't just a rhyme battle, it's a minefield. Coffee houses are notorious for hosting rebellious poets, and you're pouring for them under Hawkeye's watchful glare. One wrong move, spill a drop on their precious scrolls, hanged. Serve coffee too weak for their muse, exiled to a life of sweeping floors. You're dodging more than hookahs now. You're dodging danger. You approach the poets, tray steady despite your nerves, and pour from the sezvi. The coffee's froth is flawless, its aroma cutting through the room's haze like a blade. The lead poet, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, recites a verse about a tyrant's chains. You freeze, mid-pour, as heads turn. His words are veiled, but everyone knows he's jabbing at the Sultan. You glance at Hawkeye's, stationed by the brazier, his face unreadable. Joke 1. You're serving coffee, not courage, but these poets didn't get the memo. Mainstream history backs this up. Ottoman coffee houses were hotbeds of dissent by the 17th century. Poets and intellectuals used them to share subversive ideas, often in coded verse, risking punishment from the Sultan's spies. You set a cup before the wiry poet, bowing slightly, and catch his smirk. He sips, nods, and keeps reciting, his voice low but electric. The other poets lean in, murmuring approval, and you realize you're not just serving coffee, you're fueling rebellion. Your tray feels heavier, like it's carrying secrets. A second poet, with a beard like a bramble, waves you over. You pour, the Sesvi's steam curling like a warning, and overhear him whisper about a banned pamphlet circulating in the bazaar. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some coffee houses had poets who'd improvise verses to mock officials, using coffee cups as props to dodge suspicion. You wonder if this guy's about to pull that trick, but he just sips and scribbles, his quill scratching like a tiny war drum. You're starting to think the Cov Haynes' real danger isn't Mr. Mustache's scowl. It's these words, sharp as daggers. You move to the third poet, a younger guy with wild eyes, who's muttering about fire in the streets. Your hands shake, and a drop of coffee splashes on the table. The poets don't notice, but Hawkeye's does, his glare burning hotter than the brazier. You wipe it up, heart pounding, and retreat. Joke 2. If you get banished for a spill, you're taking that lute player with you for moral support. The poets' voices rise, their verses weaving a tapestry of defiance, and you're caught in the crossfire, tray and all. Historians still argue whether coffee houses sparked genuine rebellions or just gave poets a stage to vent. Were they cradles of revolution, or just echo chambers for hot air? You're too busy dodging trouble to care. You circle back to the wiry poet, who's now reciting louder, his verse about breaking chains, drawing murmurs from nearby tables. A merchant shoots him a nervous glance, and you wonder if spies are listening. You pour again, the coffee's froth holding strong, but your nerves are fraying. Every cup you serve feels like a bet on these poets' survival, and yours. The Cov Haynes chaos swirls on. Lutes, hookahs, Mr. Mustache's cough. But the poet's corner is its own world, crackling with danger. You flash back to the Sultan's court, those vizier's cold stares, and realize this is worse. There, you feared a bad pour here. You fear the wrong ears catching the wrong words. The young poet waves for a refill, and you oblige, your Sesvi steady, but your mind racing. His wild eyes meet yours, and for a second you think he's sizing you up. Ally or snitch, you're just trying to survive. Joke 3. You're one rebellious poem away from needing a new career, maybe goat herding like that coffee-discovering Chaldi. You glance at Hawkeye's, who's now polishing a tray with suspicious focus. He knows what's brewing here, and his silence feels like a test. You serve the last poet, his cup trembling slightly as you set it down, and step back. The Kavehane hums, a beast of smoke and sound, but the poet's words cut through, sharp and unstoppable. You grip your tray, ears pricked, and keep moving, praying you don't get caught in their fire. You're still shaken from the poet's rebellious verses, their words lingering like smoke as you slip back into the Cov Haynes' chaotic hum. Lutes twanging, hookahs gurgling, and Mr. Mustache's scowl ever present. You're pouring for a new table now, a mix of merchants and a lone scholar, when a wiry old man with a turban askew waves you over. His eyes glint with a mix of mischief and madness, and he starts ranting about coffee's medicinal powers. You're about to navigate a maze of bizarre health myths, serving coffee while dodging claims that'd make a modern doctor faint. Spill a drop, hanged. Laugh at his theories, exiled to a life of skepticism. You're in deep, and the sesvi feels like your only anchor. You pour for the old man. The coffee's froth steady despite your nerves, its earthy scent cutting through the hookah haze. He grabs the cup, sniffs it like it's fine wine, and declares it'll balance his humors. You nod, unsure what that means. But his buddies lean in, nodding like he's cracked the code to immortality. Joke 1. If coffee fixes humors, your shaky hands could use a double shot. You're starting to miss the poet's danger. This guy's nonsense is its own kind of peril. Mainstream history notes that Ottomans viewed coffee as more than a drink. By the 16th century, it was praised for aiding digestion and boosting alertness, with physicians like Ibn Sina influencing medical texts that lauded its benefits. The old man's not done, though. He claims coffee cures headaches, sharpens the mind, and, get this, wards off the plague. You glance at Hawkeye's, polishing a tray by the brazier, wondering if he buys this. The scholar at the table scribbles notes, muttering about vital spirits, and you realize these myths are gospel here. You serve the scholar next, the sesvi's steam curling like a question mark. He chimes in, saying coffee purges melancholy, but warns against drinking it cold, lest it chills the soul. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman healers prescribed coffee mixed with crushed pearls for nobility, claiming it restored youth. You picture Mr. Mustache slurping pearl-laced coffee and nearly snort. His mustache would probably reject it. You pour for the merchants, who nod at the old man's plague cure claim, and wonder how you're supposed to keep a straight face. The old man grabs your arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Boy, he says, coffee's a gift from the jinn, but too much breeds fever. You nod, easing away, but his words stick. The Kavhain's alive with chatter, merchants haggling, a poet in the corner muttering verses. But this health talk is wilder than anything you've heard. You flash back to the gossip hub, those traders' whispers, and realize myths like these are just as much a part of the coffee house's pulse. Joke 2. If coffee cures the plague, maybe it'll fix your tray balancing skills too. Historians still argue whether Ottoman coffee myths were rooted in science or superstition. Did early physicians genuinely study its effects, or were they just riffing off folklore to please patrons? You're too busy dodging the old man's wild gestures to care. You pour again, the coffee's froth holding strong, and catch a merchant claiming coffee makes you dream of paradise. You're starting to think paradise is a nap, not this Cave Hane marathon. The scholar pipes up, warning that coffee overheats the liver if brewed too strong, and you resist the urge to roll your eyes. You circle back to the old man, who's now preaching that coffee strengthens the heart, but weakens the loins. The merchants laugh, one slapping the table so hard your tray wobbles. You steady it, heart racing, and pray Hawkeyes didn't see. The sesvi's getting low, so you hustle to the brazier, dodging a hookah pipe and a poet's flailing quill. The coffee house's chaos hasn't slowed. Lutes, shouts, Mr. Mustache's cough, and these health myths are just another layer of its madness. You're learning to nod, pour, and keep moving, even when the claims get weirder. Joke 3. If coffee's a cure-all, you're prescribing yourself a gallon for surviving this shift. You glance at Hawkeye's, his stare sharp as ever, and wonder if he's heard these myths 1,000 times. You refill the sesvi, the grounds swirling like the old man's tales, and head back to the table. The scholars now debating coffee's effect on phlegmatic humors, and you're officially lost. The kavehane hums, a beast of smoke and stories, and you're caught in its grip, serving myths as much as coffee. You're still dodging the old man's wild health claims, his talk of coffee curing plagues, and chilling souls echoing in your head as you weave through the kavehane's smoky chaos, lutes strumming, hookahs bubbling, Mr. Mustache's cough a grim metronome. Your tray's heavy again, loaded with fresh cups, and the froth on your coffee is holding. But now you're facing a new beast, the cutthroat economics of the coffee trade. Every pour you serve is tied to a web of merchants, taxes, and ruthless deals, and you're about to feel the pressure of keeping this kavehane afloat. Spill a drop, hanged. Skimp on grounds, exiled to a life of debt. You're not just a server, you're a cog in a caffeine-fueled machine. You approach a table of traders, their silk robes flashing with wealth, and pour from the sesvi, its steam curling like a merchant's promise. They're haggling over a coffee shipment from Mocha, tossing around sums that make your head spin. One, a burly man with a gold ring, complains about port taxes doubling. You set a cup before him, bowing slightly, and catch his scowl. This better be worth the price, he grumbles. Joke 1. If coffee's this expensive, you're charging extra for your tray balancing act. Mainstream history confirms the coffee trade was a cornerstone of the Ottoman economy by the 17th century. Beans from Yemen, shipped through ports like Mocha, fueled markets across the empire, with Istanbul's coffee houses consuming tons annually. You're starting to see why. These traders treat coffee like gold, and you're the one grinding, brewing, and serving it. You pour for the second trader, a wiry guy with a ledger, who's muttering about a rival undercutting his prices. The kavehane's buzzing, but their talk is all business, and you're caught in the crossfire. You move to the third trader. The sesvis wait familiar now, and overhear him whisper about bribing a port official. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman merchants hid coffee beans in spice sacks to dodge taxes, risking jail if caught. You glance at your grounds, flashing back to Hawkeye's sacred bean lecture, and wonder if these guys pulled that trick. The froth is perfect, but the trader barely notices, too busy cursing a delayed caravan. You're learning fast. Every cup you serve is a link in a chain of deals, and one bad batch could tank their profits and your job. The burly trader snaps his fingers for a refill, and you hustle over, tray wobbling. His ring glints as he gestures, and you realize these guys aren't just customers. They're the kavehane's lifeblood. You pour, the coffee's aroma rich but no comfort now, and catch him muttering about a competitor's shoddy beans. Joke 2. If their beans are shoddy, you're not taking the blame for gritty coffee. You're starting to feel the trade's weight. Every grind, every brew, ties you to their world of risk and reward. Historians still argue whether the coffee trade empowered merchants or chained them to the Sultan's whims. Did it create wealth or just line the palace's pockets with taxes? You're too busy dodging glares to care. You circle back to the wiry trader, who's now scribbling furiously, his ledger a maze of numbers. You pour again, the sesvi's steam stinging your eyes, and catch a whiff of hookah smoke from a nearby table. The kavehane's chaos. Poets, lutes, Mr. Mustache, feels distant. This table's all about coin. The third trader leans in, whispering about a new tax on coffee houses. Your stomach twists. You're already stretched thin, and now the kavehane might cut corners. You serve him, bowing just enough, and retreat, tray rattling. You flash back to the poet's rebellious verses, their talk of tyrants' chains, and wonder if these traders are brewing their own kind of defiance. The lute player's tune shifts, sharper now, and the room's energy tightens. You're not just serving coffee, you're serving a system, and it's unforgiving. Joke 3. If you survive this shift, you're opening a lemonade stand. Less drama. You glance at Hawkeye's, lurking by the brazier, his stare sharp as a tax collector's. He knows the trade's stakes, and his silence feels like a warning. You refill the sesvi, the grounds swirling like the trader's schemes, and head to another table. The cave hane hums, a beast of smoke and deals, and you're trapped in its gears, pouring coffee to keep the machine running, hoping you don't break under the pressure. You're still reeling from the trader's cutthroat coffee talk, their whispers of taxes and bribes buzzing in your head, as you navigate the Cave Hane's smoky chaos, lutes twanging, hookahs gurgling, Mr. Mustache's cough a grim reminder of your endless shift. You're pouring for a new table now, a mix of scholars and a grim-faced cleric, when the air shifts. The cleric, his robe stark black, slams his cup down and declares coffee a devil's brew. You freeze, sesvi mid-pour, as heads turn. You're about to wade into a religious firestorm, serving coffee while dodging debates that could torch your day. Spill a drop, hanged. Side with the wrong argument, exiled to a life of penance. You're in over your head, and the froth's the least of your worries. You set a cup before the cleric, the coffee's aroma rich but suddenly ominous, and step back. He's ranting now, claiming coffee stirs sinful passions and defies God's will. The scholars push back, one citing ancient texts that praise coffee's clarity. You're just trying to keep your tray steady, but their words crackle like the brazier's coals. Joke 1. If coffee's the devil's brew, you're Satan's barista, and business is booming. You glance at Hawkeye's, polishing a sesvi by the wall, his silence louder than the lute's strum. Mainstream history confirms coffee sparked religious debates in the Ottoman Empire. In the 16th century, some clerics, especially conservative ones, tried to ban it, arguing it mimicked wine's intoxication and fueled vice in Cavhanes. You pour for a scholar, his turban bobbing as he defends coffee as a scholar's tool. The cleric scoffs, calling it a gateway to heresy. You're starting to see why the Cavhanes a battleground, not just for poets' verses or traders' deals, but for souls. You serve another scholar, the froth holding strong, and pray you stay invisible. The cleric leans forward, his eyes boring into you. Boy, he says, do you drink this poison? You mumble something about being too busy, and he snorts. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some anti-coffee clerics claimed grounds left in cups could summon jinn if read for fortunes. You flash back to that fortune-telling trick you considered. Thanking your lucky stars you didn't try it. You pour for the second scholar, dodging the cleric's glare, and catch him muttering about coffee's holy origins in Ethiopia. The Cavhanes noise, poets, hookahs, Mr. Mustache, feels like a shield, but you're exposed here. The debate heats up, the cleric quoting scripture while a scholar counters with philosophy. You're dodging verbal crossfire, tray wobbling as you refill the cleric's cup, ironic, since he hates it. Joke 2. If coffee's sinful, he's committing blasphemy with every sip. You're starting to miss the trader's tax gripes, at least those didn't involve eternal damnation. The sesvi's steam stings your eyes, and you flash back to the old man's health myths. Plague cures sound tame compared to this. You're serving fuel for a holy war, and every pour feels like picking a side. Historians still argue whether religious bans on coffee were about faith or control. Did clerics fear its sin, or its power to gather crowds in rebellious Cavhanes? You're too busy dodging glares to care. You serve the third scholar, his quill scratching furiously, and catch him whisper that coffee sharpens the soul. The cleric slams his fist, rattling your tray, and you retreat, heart pounding. The kavehane hums, lutes shouts, a poet's cough, and you realize this debate's just another layer of its chaos, like the poet's verses or the trader's deals. You circle back to the cleric, who's now preaching to a merchant eavesdropping from the next table. You pour, the froth perfect, but he barely notices, too busy damning coffee to hell. You're learning to nod, serve, and slip away, but the tension's suffocating. The scholars hold their ground, one citing a Sufi poet who called coffee God's nectar. You're starting to think the only nectar here is a nap. Far from this madness. Joke 3. If coffee's a sin, you're the Kavhane's chief sinner, and proud of it. You glance at Hawkeye's, his stare sharp as a scimitar, and wonder if he's picking sides. You refill the sesvi, the ground swirling like the cleric's wrath, and head to another table. The Kavhane's a beast of smoke and sound, and you're trapped in its claws, serving coffee that's either divine or damned, hoping you don't get burned. You're still rattled from the cleric's fiery rants, his talk of coffee as the devil's brew clinging to you like the Kavhane's smoke as you weave through the chaos. Lutes strumming, hookahs bubbling, Mr. Mustache's cough a grim constant. You're pouring for a new table, a rowdy group of merchants and poets, when you notice something. No women. The Kavehane is a sea of turbans, beards, and male bravado, and you're about to navigate the tension of this male-only world where coffee fuels egos and exclusion. Spill a drop, hanged. Question the rules, exiled to a life of whispers. You're serving more than coffee, you're serving a system, and it's rigid as the sesvi in your hand. You approach the table, tray steady, and pour from the sesvi. The froth perfect despite your unease. The merchants are boasting about trade deals, while a poet spins a verse about unrequited love. Their voices clash, loud and unyielding, and you realize this space is theirs. Men's turf, no exceptions. You set a cup before a merchant, his gold ring glinting, and catch his glance toward the door, like he's expecting trouble. Joke 1. If women were allowed, they'd probably outpoet these guys and steal the show. Mainstream history confirms Ottoman coffee houses were male domains. By the 16th and 17th centuries, Kavhanes were social hubs for men only, with women relegated to private homes or rare female-only gatherings. You pour for the poet, his quill pausing as he sips, and wonder what a woman's take on his sappy verse would be. The Kavhane's energy is raw. Debates, boasts, the lutes twang, but it's one-sided, a club where half the world's voice is missing. You're starting to feel the weight of that silence, even as you dodge hookah pipes. A merchant leans in, lowering his voice. "Keep the women out," he mutters, "or we'll have chaos." You nod, unsure if he's joking, but his friend laughs, saying women would drink us dry. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman women brewed coffee at home, hosting secret salons where they gossiped and read fortunes, outwitting the Kavhane's ban. You flash back to that fortune-telling trick you skipped, wondering if women perfected it. You pour for the second merchant, the sesvi's steam curling like a secret, and catch the poet's smirk, like he knows you're eavesdropping. The table's rowdier now, the poet reciting louder, his love poem veering into risky territory, something about a veiled beauty defying tradition. Heads turn, and you tense, tray wobbling. You're reminded of the rebellious poet's verses, their tyrant's chains talk, and wonder if this guy's flirting with trouble. Joke 2. If he's wooing rebellion, you're not serving coffee, you're serving bail money. You move to the third merchant, his turban askew, and pour, the froth holding strong. The Kavhane's noise, Lutes, hookahs, Mr. Mustache presses in, but the absence of women feels louder. Historians still argue whether the Cov-Haines male-only rule was about culture or control. Did it reflect social norms, or was it a way to keep women from the subversive ideas brewing here? You're too busy dodging glares to care. You circle back to the poet, who's now debating with a merchant about women's wiles. You pour again. The sesvies wait familiar but heavy, and catch the merchant's wink, like you're in on the joke. You're not. You're just trying to survive this testosterone-fueled storm. The lute player shifts to a mournful tune, and the room's mood dips, the poet's boasts softening. You flash back to the cleric's rants, his fear of coffee's sinful passions, and wonder if he'd blame women for that too. You serve another cup, the merchant grabbing it without a glance, and retreat, tray rattling. The Cov-Haines a beast, its male energy a wall you can't breach. You're starting to see the cracks, whispers of women's salons, the poet's risky verse, but you're stuck on this side, serving a world that's half complete. Joke 3. If you make it through this shift, you're pitching a co-ed Cave-Hane. Better poetry, less mustache. You glance at Hawkeye's, lurking by the brazier, his stare sharp as ever. He knows the rules, and his silence feels like a lock on the door. You refill the sesvi, the grounds swirling like inspoken voices, and head to another table. The Cave-Hane hums, a beast of smoke and bravado, and you're caught in its grip, serving coffee to a world that's loud but incomplete, hoping you don't stir up trouble. You're still shaken by the Cov-Haines male-only vibe, the merchant's boasts and poet's verses echoing in your head as you trudge through the smoky chaos. Lutes fading, hookahs gurgling, Mr. Mustache's cough now a hoarse rasp. The lamps flicker dimmer, and the air feels heavier, like the night itself is slumping. You're on the night shift now, a grueling slog where exhaustion creeps in like a thief, and every pour tests your will to stay upright. The coffee house never sleeps, and neither do you. Spill a drop? Hanged. Nod off mid-pour? Exile to a life of eternal yawns. You're fighting a losing battle, and the sesvi feels like a lead weight. You shuffle to a table of late-night stragglers, 2 merchants and a scholar, their eyes bleary but sharp. You pour from the sesvi, the froth barely holding as your hands shake. The coffee's aroma, once rich, now just stings your nose, and the brazier's glow feels mocking. The merchants are muttering about a delayed caravan. The scholar scribbling by lamplight. You set a cup before the scholar, and he grunts, too tired to complain. Joke 1. If coffee cures melancholy, you need a vat to survive this shift. Mainstream history notes that Ottoman coffee houses often stayed open late, especially in Istanbul, serving as nocturnal hubs for traders, scholars, and insomniacs by the 17th century. You're feeling every second of that tradition now. The Cov-Haines quieter but no less demanding. Fewer voices, but every clink of a cup or creak of the floor grates on your nerves. You pour for a merchant, his turban sagging, and catch him griping about night tariffs at the port. You're too drained to eavesdrop, but you flash back to the traders' economic woes, their tax rants, and realize the night shift's just as cutthroat. A new patron, a poet with a drooping mustache, waves you over. You pour, the sesvi slipping slightly, and a drop hits the table. He doesn't notice, too busy muttering a half-baked verse about the moon. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some night shift servers sprinkled extra grounds in cups to keep patrons awake. Hoping for bigger tips, you consider it, but your hands are too shaky, and Hawkeye's is lurking by the hookah racks, his stare a silent whip. You wipe the drop, heart thudding, and move on, praying you don't collapse. The scholar calls for a refill, his voice a tired croak. You oblige, the Sesvi's steam blending with the Covhain's haze, and catch him muttering about nocturnal humors. You flash back to the old man's health myths, coffee curing plagues, and wonder if it can cure exhaustion. Joke 2, if coffee's a miracle, you're still waiting for the miracle of a break. The Covhain's rhythm is slower now. Lute's gone, hookah's fading, but the weight of each pour, each step is crushing. You're a ghost in this smoky beast, serving shadows who barely see you. Historians still argue whether night shift Covhains were vital social spaces or just exploited labor. Did they foster late-night ideas, or just grind servers like you into dust? You're leaning toward dust as you pour for the poet, his verse now a sleepy mumble. The froth's thin, and he squints but says nothing. You're starting to miss the daytime chaos, poets' rebellions, clerics' rants, because this quiet is worse, a void that amplifies your fatigue. The merchant's voice rises, complaining about a rival, and you nod, half listening, just to stay awake. You circle back to the scholar, his lamp flickering like your willpower. You pour, the Sesvi trembling, and catch a whiff of hookah smoke, sweet but cloying. The Covhain's walls, carved with fading arabesques, seem to close in, and Mr. Mustache's cough from a corner feels like a countdown. You're drowning in the night shift's slog, each cup a battle against sleep. Joke 3, if you make it to dawn, you're naming your first kid Sesvi. It's the only thing keeping you going. You glance at Hawkeye's, his silhouette sharp against the brazier's dying glow. He's still watching, and you wonder if he ever sleeps. You refill the Sesvi, the grounds swirling like your fading thoughts, and shuffle to another table. The Covehane hums, a tired beast of smoke and whispers, and you're trapped in its jaws, serving coffee to keep yourself upright, hoping you don't crumble before the sun rises. You're barely holding on, the night shift's exhaustion seeping into your bones like damp rot as you shuffle through the Covhain's fading chaos. Hookah's sputtering, Mr. Mustache's cough now a faint wheeze in the dimness. The lamps are low, casting long shadows, but the coffee house still hums with a stubborn pulse. You're pouring for a lone scholar, his quill scratching under flickering light. When you sense a shift, coffee's role in Ottoman culture is changing, and you're caught in the slow churn of tradition bending under new pressures. Spill a drop, hanged. Miss the trend, exiled to a life of irrelevance. You're serving more than coffee, you're serving a world in flux, and your Sesvi feels like a relic. You set a cup before the scholar, the froth thin from your trembling hands, its aroma muted by the Covhain's stale air. He's muttering about a new European envoy in town, one who prefers tea over coffee. You blink, wondering if you heard right. The Covhain's still a fortress of coffee, but cracks are showing. You pour again, dodging a stray hookah pipe, and catch the scholar's sigh about modern tastes. Joke 1, if tea takes over, you're quitting to sell kebabs. Less drama, better smell. Mainstream history confirms that by the late 17th century, Ottoman coffee culture faced shifts. European influences, trade routes, and new beverages like tea began nudging coffee's dominance, especially in cosmopolitan Istanbul. You're feeling it now. The scholar's not alone. A merchant at a nearby table, his turban crisp despite the hour, grumbles about foreign fads cutting into coffee profits. You flash back to the traders' economic rants, their tax woes, and realize this is bigger. The Covhain's soul is at stake. You serve the merchant, the Sesvi's steam faint, and his scowl says he feels the change too. A poet slumps in the corner, his verses quieter, almost mournful. You pour for him, the froth barely there, and overhear him lament coffee's waning star. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some late-night Covhanes started serving sweetened sherbets to compete with tea's rise, hoping to lure younger patrons. You imagine Hawkeyes forcing you to juggle sherbet jugs and shudder. Coffee's bad enough. The poet sips, muttering about tradition's death, and you wonder if he's right. The Covhane's still packed, but its energy feels fragile, like a song fading out. You move to another table, a mix of traders and a sleepy soldier. You pour, the sesvi slipping slightly, and a drop hits the rug. You freeze, but no one notices, too tired or too distracted. Hawkeyes is by the brazier, his stare softer, like he's feeling the shift too. Joke 2. If tea wins, maybe Hawkeyes will trade his glare for a smile. Not likely. You're starting to miss the night shift's slog. At least exhaustion was familiar. This change, tea, new tastes, less coffee, feels like betrayal, like the sacred beans you sorted way back are losing their magic. Historians still argue whether coffee's cultural shift was driven by trade or taste. Did Europeans and new drinks dilute its hold, or did Ottomans just crave variety? You're too drained to care, but the scholar's words sting. Coffee's old now. You pour again, the sesvi's weight crushing, and catch the merchant muttering about a tea shop opening near the bazaar. You flash back to the women's exclusion, their secret salons, and wonder if they're sipping tea instead. The Covhane's noise, hookahs, whispers, Mr. Mustache, feels hollow, a beast panting its last. You circle back to the scholar, his quill slowing. You pour, the froth gone, and he doesn't complain, just stares at his parchment like it's a lost cause. The poet's verse stops, and the soldier yawns, his cup untouched. You're serving a Cavehane that's clinging to its past, but the future's creeping in. Tea, sherbet, change. You're exhausted, not just from the shift, but from the weight of it all. Joke 3. If coffee's out, you're out too. Maybe you'll sleep through the tea revolution. You glance at Hawkeyes, his silhouette faint against the brazier's dying coals. He's still watching, but his nod feels like a farewell. You refill the sesvi, the ground sluggish, and shuffle to another table. The Cavehane hums, a tired beast of smoke and fading glory, and you're trapped in its twilight, serving coffee to a world that's slipping away, hoping you can keep up. You're still grappling with the Covhane's fading glory. The scholars talk of tea and change, heavy in your mind, as you shuffle through the dimming chaos. Hookahs barely hissing, Mr. Mustache's cough now a ghost in the haze. The lamps are nearly out, casting the coffee house in a twilight glow, and your legs feel like lead from the night shift's grind. You're pouring for a new table, a trio of foreign traders with strange accents and stranger clothes, when you realize you're facing another shift. Outsiders are reshaping the Covhane's world. Spill a drop, hanged. Serve them wrong, exile to a life of scorn. You're serving coffee to a changing tide, and your sesvi feels out of place. You approach the foreigners, tray trembling, and pour from the sesvi, the froth patchy from your exhaustion. Their eyes, blue, sharp, un-Ottoman, track your every move. One, a Venetian with a feathered cap, sniffs the coffee and mutters something in a tongue you don't catch. The others, maybe Dutch, nod but look unimpressed. You set a cup before the Venetian, bowing awkwardly, and he smirks. Joke 1. If these guys don't like your coffee, you're blaming their fancy hats, not your brew. Mainstream history confirms that by the late 17th century, foreign traders flooded Istanbul, bringing new tastes and trade pressures to the Ottoman coffee trade. Europeans, especially Venetians and Dutch, were buying up beans and opening their own cafes, tweaking the Covhane's vibe. You pour for the Dutch trader, his coat stiff with embroidery, and catch him whispering about better brews back home. You flash back to the scholar's tea talk, the cultural shift, and realize these foreigners are part of it, pushing coffee into new shapes, away from your sacred beans and frothy rituals. The Venetian waves you over, demanding a refill. You pour, the Sesvi's steam faint, and overhear him brag about a coffee house in Venice with finer cups. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some European traders tried blending Ottoman coffee with sugar syrup, a sweet shock that horrified purists like Hawkeyes. You imagine him spitting at the idea and nearly smile. The froth's gone, but the Venetian doesn't notice, too busy gesturing at his ledger. You're serving men who see coffee as profit, not poetry, and it stings. You move to the third trader, a quiet one with a scar on his cheek. You pour, dodging his stare, and catch him muttering about shipping costs. The Covhain's quieter now. Loot's gone, hookah's cold, but these foreigners bring their own energy, sharp and alien. Joke too, if they remake the Cavehane, you're begging for a job in Venice. Less Hawkeyes, more gondolas. You're starting to miss the poets' rebellions, even the clerics' rants. Those felt like home. These traders are rewriting the rules, and you're just a server caught in their wake. Historians still argue whether foreign traders revitalized or diluted Ottoman coffee culture. Did they spread its glory or strip it of its soul? You're too tired to care, but the Venetian's smirk feels like a theft. You circle back to him, pouring again, the Sesvi slipping in your grip. He sips, then pushes the cup away, muttering about too bitter. You bite your tongue, flashing back to the grinding precision, the brazier's dance, all for this. The Covhain's haze feels suffocating. Mr. Mustache's cough a faint echo, and you wonder if the coffee house is losing its heart. The Dutch trader leans in, asking for less froth next time, and you nod, though it feels like blasphemy. You're serving men who don't get it. The rituals, the gossip, the soul of the Cavehane. You glance at Hawkeyes, slumped by the brazier, his stare distant, like he's mourning too. The foreigners' voices rise, their ledgers open, and you realize they're not just drinking coffee, they're reshaping it one cup at a time. Joke 3, if they ruin coffee, you're switching to sherbet. Less ego, same burn. You refill the Sesvi, the grounds sluggish, and shuffle to another table, the foreigners' chatter trailing you. The Cavehane hums, a weary beast of smoke and fading tradition, and you're trapped in its twilight, serving coffee to men who'll change it forever. You're exhausted, not just from the shift, but from the weight of watching your world slip. You grip your tray, steady your hands, and keep pouring, hoping you can hold on a little longer. You're still reeling from the foreign traders' sharp eyes and sharper demands, their talk of sweeter brews and finer cups gnawing at you. As you trudge through the Covhain's waning chaos, hookah's silent, Mr. Mustache's cough now a faint rattle in the gloom. The lamps are nearly spent, casting jagged shadows, and your body aches from the night shift's endless grind. You're pouring for a hushed table of poets and a lone merchant when you catch a whisper. Talk of rebellion brewing in the coffee house's corners. The air tightens, and you're about to navigate a storm of sedition where every cup could mark you as a traitor. Spill a drop, hanged. Hear too much, exile to a life on the run. You're serving coffee, but danger's the real brew. You approach the table, tray unsteady, and pour from the Sesvi, the froth gone, its aroma flat in the stale air. The lead poet, a gaunt man with sunken eyes, leans close to the merchant, muttering about a spark in the bazaar. His voice is low, but the word uprising cuts through. You set a cup before him, hands shaking, and glance at Hawkeyes, slouched by the brazier, his stare sharper than ever. Joke 1. If rebellion's brewing, you're sticking to decaf. Less trouble, same buzz. Mainstream history confirms Ottoman coffee houses were rebellion hubs by the late 17th century. Kahvehanes like yours sheltered dissidents, poets, soldiers, even merchants, who plotted against taxes or the Sultan's decrees, often under cover of verse or gossip. You pour for the merchant, his turban frayed, and catch his nod to the poet, like they're sealing a pact. The Kahvehane's quieter now, but the tension's electric, a pulse beneath the fading lutes and hookahs. You're not just serving coffee, you're serving a conspiracy, and every step feels like a trap. The second poet, a younger man with a scar on his lip, whispers about a janissary meeting at dawn. You pour, the sesvi slipping, and a drop hits the table. They don't notice, too deep in their plot, but your heart hammers. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some rebels hid messages in coffee grounds, leaving coded patterns in cups for allies to read. You flash back to that fortune-telling trick you never tried, wondering if these guys are doing it now. You wipe the drop, praying Hawkeye's missed it, and move to the merchant, his eyes darting like he's already running. The poet's voice drops lower, mentioning a signal in the Grand Bazaar. You're frozen, sesvi in hand, flashing back to the rebellious verses you served earlier. Their tyrant's chains talk. This is worse. Real plans, not just poetry. Joke 2. If they start a revolt, you're hiding under the rug with Mr. Mustache's hookah. You set a cup before the younger poet, his scar twitching as he sips, and retreat, tray rattling. The Kahvehane's shadows feel alive. Every creak a spy's footstep, and you're caught in the crosshairs. Historians still argue whether coffee house rebellions were organized plots or just angry talk. Did they threaten the Sultan, or fizzle out in cups? You're too scared to care. You circle back to the gaunt poet, pouring again. The sesvi steam blending with the Kahvehane's haze. He mentions a fire in the arsenal, and the merchant hisses for silence. You flash back to the foreign traders, their ledgers and smirks, and wonder if their influence, new tastes, new tensions, fueled this. The Kahvehane's a tinderbox, and you're serving sparks. The merchant waves for a refill, his hand trembling. You pour, the froth long gone, and catch his glance toward the door, like he's expecting soldiers. You're starting to miss the night shift's slog, even the tea talk. Those were safer. The younger poet mutters about blood in the streets, and you nearly drop the sesvi. The Kahvehane's noise, Mr. Mustache's cough, a distant lute, feels like a thin veil over this treason. You're serving men who might not see dawn, and you might go down with them. Joke 3. If you survive this, you're writing a poem called Ode to Quitting. No coffee required. You glance at Hawkeye's, his silhouette rigid against the brazier's dying glow. He's heard it all, and his silence feels like a noose. You refill the sesvi, the ground's sluggish, and shuffle to another table, the poet's whispers trailing you. The Kahvehane hums, a dying beast of smoke and secrets, and you're trapped in its heart, serving coffee to rebels, hoping you don't burn with them. You're still trembling from the poet's whispered plots, their talk of uprisings and signals haunting you. As you stumble through the Kahvehane's ghostly haze, hookah's dead, Mr. Mustache's cough now a faint echo in the dark. The lamps are out, leaving only the brazier's dying coals to light your way, and your body's screaming from the night shift's grind. You're pouring for a lone trader, his face half hidden in shadow, when you feel it. The coffee house is fading, its glory slipping under the weight of modernity. You're serving the twilight of an era, and every cup feels like a goodbye. Spill a drop? Hanged. Cling to the past, exiled to a life of nostalgia. Your sesvi's heavy with more than coffee, it's carrying a dying world. You set a cup before the trader, the froth gone, its aroma lost in the Covhane's stale air. He's muttering about a new tavern near the port, one serving tea and wine, drawing crowds from places like this. You pour, hands numb, and catch his sigh about empty tables. The Covhane's a shell now, its buzz. Lutes, poets, rebels, fading like a dream. Joke 1. If the Covehane closes, you're opening a nap shop. Guaranteed customers, no froth required. Mainstream history confirms the decline of Ottoman coffee houses by the early 18th century. New drinks like tea, European-style cafes, and stricter laws curbed their influence, as modernity and foreign tastes reshaped Istanbul's social scene. You flash back to the foreign traders' smirks, their talk of sweeter brews, and realize they were the vanguard. You pour again, the sesvi slipping, and the trader doesn't notice, too busy counting coins. The Covhane's walls, once alive with arabesques, feel like a tomb, and you're serving its last rites. A poet shuffles in, his quill limp, and slumps at a corner table. You pour, the sesvi's steam faint, and overhear him mumble about forgotten songs. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some dying Covhanes hired dancers to lure patrons back, a desperate bid against tavern's flash. You imagine twirling with your tray and shudder. Your dancing's worse than your grinding. The poet sips, his eyes hollow, and you flash back to the rebellious verses, their fire now ash. The Covhane's losing its soul, and you're pouring for ghosts. You move to another table, empty but for a cracked cup. You pour anyway, a reflex, and a drop hits the rug. No one's left to care, not even Hawkeye's, slumped by the brazier, his stare dull. Joke 2. If the Covhane's done, Hawkeye's might retire as a tea taster. Imagine that scowl with a teacup. You're starting to miss the chaos. Clerics' rants, traders' deals, even Mr. Mustache's glares. This quiet is worse. Avoid swallowing the life you've slaved for. The trader's voice fades, his coins clinking like a dirge. Historians still argue whether the Covhane's decline was inevitable or enforced. Did new tastes kill it, or did the Sultan's laws choke its rebellious spirit? You're too drained to care. But the trader's words, no one comes anymore, cut deep. You circle back to him, pouring again. The sesvi nearly empty. He pushes the cup away, muttering about a tavern's better lights. You flash back to the women's exclusion, their secret salons, and wonder if they've moved on too. The Covhane's a husk, its smoke and stories fading. The poet coughs, weaker than Mr. Mustache ever was, and you pour, the ground's barely swirling, the brazier's coals are cold, and the Covhane's silence is deafening. No lutes, no hookahs, just your footsteps. You're serving a memory, each cup a nod to the grind, the froth, the gossip that defined this place. Joke 3. If you survive this shift, you're framing that sesvi. It's seen more than most sultans. You glance at Hawkeye's, his silhouette fading, and feel the end closing in, heavy as the night. You refill the sesvi, a pointless act, and shuffle to an empty table. The Covehane whispers, a dying beast of smoke and loss, and you're trapped in its final breath, serving coffee to a world that's moved on. You're exhausted, not just from the shift, but from watching your purpose slip away. You grip your tray, steady your hands, and keep pouring, knowing the end is near. You're swaying on your feet. The Covhane's final whispers, faint echoes of hookahs and Mr. Mustache's cough, fading into a hollow silence as you clutch the sesvi, its copper cold despite the dying brazier's glow. The coffee house is a graveyard now, tables empty, lamps dark, and your night shift's endless grind has left you a husk. You're pouring one last cup for a phantom patron. The trader's talk of taverns and the poet's dying verses heavy in your heart. This is your final act, a lone server in a crumbling world, reflecting on a trade that's chewed you up. Spill a drop, hanged. Keep going, exiled to a life of memories. You're done, and the sesvi feels like a tombstone. You set the cup on an empty table. The froth long gone, its aroma a ghost of the beans you once called sacred. The Covhane's walls, etched with fading arabesques, seem to lean in, mourning their own end. You pour anyway, hands steady from habit, and think back to your first chaotic shift. Lutes, poets, Mr. Mustache's scowl. You were a wreck then, dodging hookah pipes and viziers' glares. But you learned. Now there's nothing left to learn. Just this last cup. Joke 1. If coffee's a legacy, yours is a masterpiece of shaky pours. Mainstream history notes that by the 18th century, many Ottoman coffee houses closed or morphed into modern cafes, their role as social hubs, lost to tea taverns and European trends. You flash back to the foreign traders' smirks, their talk of sweeter brews, and the scholar's tea obsession. They were the future, and you're the past. You pour again, the sesvi nearly dry, and imagine Hawkeye's, now gone, his glare softened by the end. The Covhane's silence is total. No lutes, no rebels, just you and this futile ritual. A stray breeze stirs the rug, and you flinch, half expecting a poet's quill or a cleric's rant. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some servers carved their initials into Cavehane tables, a quiet rebellion against being forgotten. You trace a finger on the wood. Tempted, but stop. Your marks in every cup you served, every froth you fought for. You flash back to the grinding, the brazier's dance, the gossip and danger. You survived it all, but for what? The trader's words, no one comes anymore, echo, and you know he's right. You move to another table, pouring for no one, the sesvi's last grounds scraping the bottom. Joke 2. If this is your last shift, you're retiring to herd goats like Caldi. Less stress, better company. The Covhane's a relic, its soul drained by tea, taverns, and time. You think of the women's salons, the rebels' plots, the health myths, snippets of a world you carried on your tray. You were part of it, a speck in Istanbul's pulse, but that pulse is flat now. The brazier's coals are ash, and you're out of fight. Historians still argue whether the Covhane's fall was cultural or political. Did modernity kill it, or did the Sultan's spies finally win? You're too broken to care. You pour one final time, the cup overflowing, a dark pool on the table. You don't wipe it, let it stain. A last defiance. You flash back to the Sultan's court, the poet's fire, the endless night shift. You gave everything, and it's gone. Joke 3. If you ever serve again, it'll be water. Coffee's too cruel. You set the sesvi down. Its clink loud in the void. The Covhane's done, and so are you. You glance at the door, half hoping Hawkeyes will bark one last order, but it's just darkness. You're free, but freedom feels like loss. You turn, tray limp, and step toward the door, the coffeehouse's ghost at your back. The world softens now, the Covhane's shadows melting into a gentle blur. You're stepping away, the weight of the sesvi, the tray, the endless pours lifting like mist off the Bosphorus. The air grows cooler, quieter, the hum of Istanbul fading to a whisper, like waves lapping at a distant shore. You're not running anymore. No hookahs to dodge, no glares to fear. The coffeehouse is behind you, its stories tucked into the folds of time, safe and still. Your shoulders ease, your breath slows, and the night wraps you in its calm embrace. Let the rebels plot, the trader's scheme, the poet's dream. They're all at rest now, and so are you. The stars are out, faint but steady, and the world is soft, warm, waiting. Drift now, let go, and sink into the quiet where no cups need filling, no froth needs perfecting. Sleep calls, gentle as a breeze, and you're already there, slipping into its arms.